What are 5 of the hardest med school interview questions that exist? This is something we get asked quite frequently. What are the hardest, what are the most difficult questions that you can get? And so I'd like to discuss some of those questions with you tonight, maybe some that are expected, maybe some that are unexpected, and give you a few clues on how you might be able to respond to these effectively. First, hi, my name is Dr. Sarah Klebe, and I'm an admissions expert with BMO. So if I were to boil down all of the med school interview questions that we deal with and had to pick 5, these are the 5 that I would say rank at least in that top 5 spot. There are a lot of hard questions. They're all going to be hard. So I struggle a little bit thinking about which of the ones that I've chosen are actually the hardest. Are these the hardest? Well, that's a matter of perspective as well. But I think that these are 5 of maybe the ones that you need to think about a little bit more strategically, or they're some of the ones that students just really struggle with in general. So thinking about them ahead of the interview would be really useful. Now, along with the description of this video, I've included a link to our blog, to our repository of med school interview questions, so that you can look through those, see these and even some different examples or different twists on these as you begin your preparations. But first, let me dive in. So one question that I think is really tricky, in part because students tend to answer it as if it were a slightly different question, is this one. What would you say is your greatest limitation as an applicant this year, and why should we select you from all the other very qualified candidates? Now, one thing I want to note is that this is different from another really difficult question, which is, what is your greatest limitation? When it's asked in an open-ended way like that, they are asking for that kind of personal introspection. What's a challenge that you've really had to overcome? What's something maybe you failed at, and what did you learn from it? All those wonderful negative things that we love talking about, especially in high-pressure situations like interviews. This question's a little bit different though. And so a lot of students really prepare for what's your greatest limitation. And so as soon as I start saying this at a mock session or something like that, they're ready to talk about their greatest limitation. But that's not what this is asking. This is, what's your greatest limitation as an applicant this year? And then of course that second part, why should we choose you? We've got all of these very qualified candidates. Why you? So greatest limitation as an applicant this year is, again, still a question that you want to think really strategically about, because in a way they're asking, nobody's application is perfect. Yours is obviously strong because you're here, but what maybe isn't your strongest point as an applicant? And so you have to think about that a little bit differently than the personal question, what's your greatest limitation? If you know that maybe your shadowing experience isn't the same as everyone else's, obviously you've been able to balance that in your application with something else, or else you wouldn't be at the interview. But you need to be able to speak to that, being able to objectively review your history and identify your own weak spots and how you're going to sort of correct for those is part of that maturation process. They want to see that you are a mature professional who can acknowledge their own limitations and be able to talk through how they're going to overcome those, or make up for them in other ways, or catch up with others in that regard. And then of course there's that second part. We tend to be really uncomfortable comparing ourselves to others, particularly in somewhat negative ways. So they've already sort of set the tone. What's your greatest limitation as an applicant this year? What about you isn't perfect as an applicant? And now, using your own imagination, because you have no idea who else they're interviewing, what those other people's qualifications are, or anything. So using your own wild imagination in this high pressure situation, why should we select you from all of these other people? Maybe some of them are perfect. You're not perfect. So anyway, the point is, we can really get caught up in our heads and sort of let this negative train of thought run out of control, and we don't want that, which is why we need to prepare for a question like this. So that's when you think back to your own strengths. What is one thing that you uniquely bring that no one else can? There's something. If you haven't found it yet, you haven't dug deeply enough, but be prepared for this question. It is, as you can see, a really, really tough one, and one that a lot of people stumble on. So number 2, this is more of a question category than a specific question, but if you go to our repository of questions, you'll see some specific instances. Challenging scenarios, especially of the ethical variety. We've talked about these in a number of our videos, but I'll give you some examples in just a minute. I want to point out that we tend to associate scenarios with the multiple mini interview. But it is absolutely possible to get a scenario posited to you in any variety of medical school interview. So if you think that you've escaped this because for some reason you didn't have to do the MMI for wherever you're applying, well, no, you still need to prepare for it. So things like you're a physician and a 14-year-old girl comes in and she wants birth control, but she doesn't want her parents to know. Or you're leading in the ER and in comes a Jehovah's Witness who needs a blood transfusion. Oh, and she's also a minor. Or who gets the kidney? The 24-year-old binge drinker or the 80-year-old retired professor? There's only one kidney, only one person's getting out of here with a new kidney. Who are you going to choose? These are extremely challenging ethical scenarios. I'm going to give you an answer to one of these questions when I get to the end, but there's no way to go into all of these scenarios, but these are sort of the top in that scenario category that people really, really struggle with. So you need to be aware that laws around some of these things might be different depending on where you are with regard to minors getting birth control without their parents knowing in the United States. That can vary state by state. So be sure that you're aware of your local, state, and of course national laws in Canada and the US and anywhere else. Likewise, in terms of Jehovah's Witnesses getting a blood transfusion, this might be contextual. Some of the courts differ a little bit in how they treat this, so there isn't necessarily one universally applicable answer to this. The point, though, is to make sure that you're looking into these challenging ethical dilemmas that are in your field, even if you can't give a perfect answer. They know you're not a physician yet, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you are looking into the main pressing challenges of your field and that you can respond to these effectively. Number 3, this is more of a personal question, but I think it tends to throw people off, and I know that it would throw me off in an interview as well. What makes you angry is a really challenging question. We don't like to think about, the sort of things that we might call negative aspects of ourselves, and certainly not in an interview when we are trying to put our best self forward. And so the idea that we would have to talk about something that makes us feel a very negative emotion and maybe, that makes us act in ways that we aren't particularly proud of sometimes, that can really cause a bit of a hiccup in our response. So, you can reform the question a little bit. If I were presented with this question, I would say, well, when I think of, anger, for me, anger is expressed more as frustration or something like that. And then I would talk about something relevant. But do be prepared. They may ask you about things that you don't want to talk about, but you're also allowed to be a human being. You're not expected to be some perfectly detached hominid type creature that doesn't experience the full range of emotions and things like that. If things, make you upset, that's fine. But again, be strategic about how you answer this. Think about ways to sort of make the question your own and define it within terms that make you more comfortable. And think about the kinds of qualities that they are looking for in this question and any question, of course, and how you can sort of take the question and use it to demonstrate those key qualities, values, soft skills, things like that, that will, sort of soften maybe the negative feel that you have towards the question. Number 4 is a question that if you are planning on going to med school, you will get asked 100 times and then probably 100 more times after that. This is actually the most basic, fundamental question that you will get asked, but it is one that a lot of people struggle with. And that question is, why medicine? Why do you want to be a physician? Why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to go into the field of medicine? This is a challenging question because if you haven't prepared for it, likely a whole lot of things flood into your mind all at once, all of the things that make you want to go into this particular profession. So you really need to start early with this question, even as you're putting your initial applications together, if not sooner than that, to really craft your own narrative. What is it about this field that is pushing you in that direction? What draws you in? What catches your heart or your mind? What makes you feel like this is not just what you want to do, but it's who you want to be? Come up with a short narrative, 2 to 3 minutes, that encapsulates that feeling and speak to it authentically. Don't use cliches. I want to help people. Okay, that's great. Most people want to help people. And there are 100, if not more, different ways to help people that aren't going through the rigors necessary to become a medical doctor. We can help people in any number of different ways. So while that tends to be the first thing that people say, it's actually not the best answer. So really think strategically about this and what you want your narrative to say about your impulse and your drive and dedication towards this particular goal. Last, if you could choose any profession other than medicine, what would it be and why? So again, this one's challenging. You want to go in there and show them that going into medicine is who you are. It's what you do. It's what you're going to do. This is your passion. You are not deviating from this path. And now here they ask you a question that's the exact opposite of that. What else would you do? And why, if you weren't going to do this? So again, this is a question where you need to be honest to some degree, of course, and to think again about those core qualities, those core competencies, those core values that they're looking for, and think about ways that they would translate into a different context. Maybe it's a slightly similar context. Maybe it's a completely different context. Maybe if you weren't going in medicine, you would be, I don't know, working as an organic farmer or something like that, something completely different. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that could work depending on the qualities that you highlight. So let's formalize it a little bit, and this will be the one that I answer. So if I was asked the question, if I could choose any profession other than medicine, what would it be and why? I would think about living systems, about the kinds of care that are necessary, about the kinds of science that would be needed. So instead of saying organic farmer, let's formalize that a little bit and say something like botany. Could still translate into the organic farming realm. So botany. Well, if I weren't going into medicine, I would think about going into the field of botany. You know, there's a lot of research. I love being in the lab, and I could maintain that in that field. I'm naturally curious, and I like to explore how things have been used and what things have been overlooked over the ages. So I think that I could get some opportunity to do that there. As well, you know, there are a lot of medical treatments and drugs that began by understanding plants. Aspirin, for example, is just salicylic acid. Salicylic acid was found in certain kinds of willow bark. So the field of botany and the field of medicine aren't completely divorced. They're still utilizing the same kinds of skills and overlapping at times. And so I think that could be really useful. I could still contribute to medical advances potentially outside the formal field of medicine if I were to pursue that career. As well, you know, botany, taking care of plants and things like that, and understanding how they work, that's still a process of nurturing living things. There's beauty to behold when the systems are working correctly. There's growth that takes place when everything is tended to and equilibrium is sustained. But there's also illness. You're dealing with complex systems and things can fail at times, and you have to be able to use your insights and your knowledge to figure out how to set those complex systems right again. And, you know, in my personal time, I've always enjoyed sort of gardening and tending plants, and I'm sort of fascinated by the ways in which things grow and thrive or don't, and the role that humans can have, whatever the type of life we're dealing with, in that growth and thriving, or the opposite. So I think something like botany would allow me to continue pursuing the kinds of things that I enjoy. However, of course, it's not the same as being able to contribute quite so directly in human lives, having that day-to-day patient interaction, which is something that I really value. I think patients and physicians can form really unique and beneficial relationships, which of course is something we can't do with plants. So if it turned out that I didn't cut it for medicine, perhaps that's something I would pursue, but really I feel like partaking in or the practice of human medicine is what speaks most to my core and where my skills are going to be most useful and effective. Right, there we go. A couple of minutes, got it down. If I'd had time to think through it a little bit more, I might have polished it around the ends a little bit, but as a first run through, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm still speaking to those core qualities, to that care, that research, the passion, the sense of responsibility, the understanding of interconnectedness, all of this stuff. And I'm able to speak to why, even though this all sounds really interesting to me, I still think that my skills are best used and I'll be most fulfilled in the realm of human medicine. But it's still, I think, a pretty convincing answer and an interesting way to take on something like that. So there you go. There's your model answer to one of these questions. Again, I encourage you to look through our repository of questions and start playing with some of these on your own. These are difficult questions, but you can absolutely prepare for them in advance and do so in ways that are unique to you so that you're being your authentic best self in your interview. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. If so, please do go ahead, like it, share it with a friend who might find it beneficial, and be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, and look for us on a variety of other social media. Do feel free to comment with any questions you might have. If you'd like us to help you with your interview prep, please click the link that should appear either above or below this video to see our programs and schedule a free initial consultation. We'll set you up with one of our admissions experts to answer any of your questions and get you started on your preparation. We have programs to suit any of your needs, and we are happy to work with you to determine which plan will support you most effectively. As ever, thank you so very much for your time. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.